Well, so the key to introducing people when you don't know who they are is just to ask them to introduce themselves.
You could do that.
Great. So my name is Sean Faulkner. I'm hosting this panel. They told me about this about 30 minutes ago. But it's great to be here. Now, luckily, we're going to be talking about something that's not controversial at all and everyone agrees on, which is data ethics and data bias and so on. But why don't we start with a round of introductions? So if you could introduce yourself, what your name is, what company you work for, and a tool or technology that you can't live without. So we'll start with you, Lauren.
Cool. So I'm Lauren Pete. I'm the CEO and founder of Multitudes. We do data insights to help teams deliver faster without burning people out. So if you want to ask more about that apparent paradox, happy to chat about that at the drinks. And then the third one was a data tool you can't live without.
It could be any tool or technology, but you can go data tool if you like.
Oh, man. I was not one of the first adopters with Claude, but I am now an avid user of Claude. So I'll do the classic LLM example.
Nice. All right. And then Jessica.
Hi everyone, my name is Jess and I work at Les Mills International, and it's a bit complex to explain, but the most important thing is to know that it's not the gym that you see at Newmarket or at Victoria. And Sean actually leaked the question to me already, and I've already told him my answer, and it's SQL.
All right. And then we'll...
Finally me.
Your same questions.
Kia ora. I'm Emma MacDonald. I'm from the government, and in a situation like this, that's never controversial. So I am at Stats New Zealand, and I run the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation.
All right, great. And then your technology.
Oh, my technology. Oh, God, I don't know. Mostly my phone, I guess. Just everything on it.
All right. I'm going to go with indoor plumbing.
Overrated.
All right. So why don't we kind of set some baseline context around this? So the first thing I want to ask is, essentially, like, what is data ethics? Like, how do you kind of like think about that, define that? And we can start down with you at the end there, Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, so there's the functional answer, which is how we gather, use, share data, and thinking about that from the moral and the ethical lens. The piece of data ethics that I find really interesting is this reminder that data is not divorced from the people using it. We are the people, we shape it, the ways that we use it can turn something into something that's causing harm, or it can use it for good. And so, yeah, for me, it's that human piece that really matters within it.
Do either of you have something to add to that? Any controversial takes on this?
No, but I like that Claude was your go-to technology, and I asked Claude before I came on here, what is data technology? And give me a fun answer, Claude. And it said, when zeros and ones play nice and don't share your secrets. I thought that was quite a cute way of summing up data ethics.
Oh, that is very nice.
Yeah, no, fully agree. So data ethics is basically just about the human element, doing the right thing when using people's information. That's basically it.
So when we think about, data ethics from maybe like a data engineering, data science perspective, like how should organizations be thinking about how to essentially like factor that into the potential impact or the way that they should actually be, processing data pipelines or thinking about driving utility out of the data that they're collecting?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is, one, our head of data at Multitudes wrote a great article about this that goes across the whole pipeline from data collection all the way through to how you're evaluating it to how it's actually being used. So anyway, defer to that, and we can send out the links afterwards. A couple of things that we really think about within that. So And what's the data ethics lens on each of those? So one of the ones at the very beginning, of course, is the data collection. And I'll just do a side note here about the why of data ethics as well, because I think it's important before we dive into the bigger conversation. So, I think there's an intuitive level at which we as humans all understand why data ethics matters, because we're building things and we want it to be used for good and not for harm. So that's kind of, I think we can all agree as good people, that's the why. But obviously, there's also business impacts to it as well, in terms of risk, in terms of brand impact, if we go to Tracksuit. And so I'll give a real-world example from April of this year. You might have seen that New World had rolled out some AI facial recognition technologies And at one of their locations up in Northland, they ended up pulling aside a Maori woman and saying that she was a thief, that she'd stolen things. And as it turns out, the facial recognition technology was wrong. And so, of course, obviously, that's harm to that person who's been wrongfully accused. It's harm to that business because now their brand made national news for not something that anyone wants to make national news for. And then that technology, they've now embarrassed their customers. And so I can imagine the kinds of conversations that would have happened in the background. And that, and I know I'll do this and then I'll stop my tangent, but we know that the facial recognition technologies, there are technologies out there that'll claim things like 90% accuracy, but if you break it down by gender and by ethnicity, sure, maybe your error rate for light-skinned men is only 1%, but the error rate for darker-skinned women is 35%. So that's from some actual research by the Gender Shades Project. So yes, real harm, that's the why. And then I'll do one example and then pass to others. So it's a really specific example on the data collection side, if I continue with that facial recognition example, is most of our images that our models are being trained on, the popular image data sets are mostly made up of images from Europe and North America. And so, surprise, surprise, there's a lot more images of lighter-skinned people. And yet, most of the population of the world is in Asia. And so we're just fundamentally going to get it wrong a lot of the time if we're not thinking about, in this case, in our data collection, what's the diversity of the data we've collected? Is it actually representative of what we need to measure?
Yeah, there was a similar scandal, a situation a couple years ago with Google Photos where they were mistagging, essentially, it was like a dark hand holding like a hairdryer. It was classified as a gun. It was a white hand or white skinned hand holding a hairdryer, so a hairdryer, essentially. And then, of course, eventually Google accidentally erased white people from history with everything that happened with Gemini. But one of the things that you talked about there was the asking this question around sort of good versus something that could harm somebody, and maybe I'll turn this to the other people on the panel. Like a lot of that ends up being somewhat subjective. What might be, I think, is benefiting people could actually be wildly offensive to someone else, depending on my background and my perspective on it. So how can a business essentially sort of like try to balance that decision around what we think is good, but maybe could actually end up being offensive to somebody?
That's a really good question. And I should say I'm a complete fraud here. I'm not a data scientist. I'm a social scientist. I don't even understand what you fellas do. Should probably just put that out there now. That whole harm and what does it mean is really important. That's why the relationships at the beginning is really important. And I'm using AI as code for any data-driven technology that is taking data and doing things at speed. But as we get faster and faster with what we're doing, the relationships become more and more important from a business perspective. If you don't understand what your customers want and where the benefit is coming from, you're going to do dumb things like the New World did. And what I found really fascinating about that was there were employees who looked at that photo and they believed the technology because of the technology bias. And so if you're not au fait with the technology, you're still going to see harm, even if you have the human in the loop that we keep on talking about. And so understanding what's important to your customers from the New Zealand government, that's obviously society, and having those honest conversations and not assuming you know everything in your little room in the back of the office, but actually have those real life conversations to start off with.
Great. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I remember I did a research on ethics when I was interning at Curious, and one of the this was a while ago. So, and one of the scenarios was there was a government agency. I think maybe Emma, you know this as well, but I won't name it. But there was a model that predicted which household, which children in each household was most likely going to go. Experience domestic abuse, and at the end of it, they decided to not deploy that model because essentially they decided that it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, always, I think having good AI principles and data ethics principles in place is always good. And going back to that question earlier, just from the collection process to the end, when you're managing it and you're just transforming in a data warehouse using, as a data engineer, when you're building up the data pipelines, the anonymization techniques you can use, and also like role-based access management, these are all the things that you can use. So at Les Mills, when we collect data, we actually use a consent management platform so that every data that we collect is, we require explicit user consent before we collect it. I know this is a bit of a tangent. I'm trying to answer like two questions in one. But yeah, and at the end, once that is processed and it's all good, we use a preference center as well to allow users to opt out of like profiling and all that. So we're really putting that power back into our customers' hands. Yeah.
Great. Oh.
I just want to pull out, this is a plus one, but two things that you'd share that I just want to pull out. So one, if you don't have a set of data ethics principles, then it's a great place to start because it's that pre-work before the tricky situation comes up where you've had that alignment and conversation as a team about what you care about. And then frankly, it gives you some accountability of, hey, you know, especially if you're able to share it publicly, which I would also recommend, that accountability of here's what we said we would do, did we do it? So that's the first one I wanted to pull out. And then the second one I heard actually in both of your examples was I think it's this very Western concept that you can divorce the data from the people it is about, and you cannot. And you know, we can talk more about this later, but there's a lot of great principles within the Indigenous data sovereignty movement, because frankly, Indigenous folks are a population that, one of the populations that knows the most about having data misused against them. And so anyway, one of the principles of that is you need to remember that this data is in relationship to the people it's about. And so if we're making tough decisions about that data, we should probably consult with the people it's about. And so, for example, with multitudes, we are using data about organizations. There's a power dynamic, right, between ICs and then the leaders in those organizations. And so for us, one of the examples is we need to always be testing what we're doing with the ICs and seeing how they feel about this data.
One of the things I'd pull out on that is on that accountability issue and having the ability to be able to speak truth to power, because within that whole government thing, taking the robo-debt in Australia, people knew what was happening in the robo-debt. If you don't know what happened there, they used an algorithm. It wasn't AI, it was just a basic algorithm to work across what the income was for people who were getting benefits, and a whole pile of people got found to owe money to the government, and these were people that could not afford to pay it back, and it was just because of the way that the algorithm had run and that got things wrong. People knew it was wrong, and it led to real harm within certain communities, but they couldn't speak to power, and so therefore there wasn't the ability to be able to feed it up. So governance is really important. Your leadership is really important to be able to say, actually, this algorithm isn't right. We're going to be doing harm here. We need to stop. And having a culture within all of your businesses and within government to be able to say, actually, it's all on us to be able to speak up when we see that harm.
When it comes to this idea of having defined principles, how do you turn that into something that's like actionable? Like, can you turn that into, for example, some sort of like checklist that you use so that when you're putting together a project, like, okay, let's at least make sure that we're actually doing the things that we are saying publicly from a principles perspective?
I can say this really quickly for how we do it. So, I mean, it's basically that. We, once a quarter, we look at all the features that are coming up. We have so for us, it's 5 principles. We run those features through the principles. We have a team discussion. And then if there's any things that we flag, we talk about, well, can we mitigate those risks? And then in once, maybe 2 examples, we didn't feel confident in the mitigation options that we had, and so we actually just didn't build the features. So we actually have our next team strategy week next week, and that's one of the sessions where we'll be doing that.
I've kind of already mentioned these already, but we have 4 principles that we follow. So number 1 is we try to what was it? Let me think. Okay, it might be out of order, but 1 is we try to respond to every data subject request. So that's DSARs, and so we have a privacy portal for that where users can log in, verify their identity as a customer, and you can request all the information that we hold about you at Les Mills. You can ask us to rectify any incorrect information, and you can even request us to delete it. So that's number 1. Number 2, before data minimization and transparency. We only collect data that is necessary, and we make it very clear to you what we're collecting and why we're collecting it. That's one. And two is before we collect any data, we ask for consent, and I've mentioned that already. Like, we use a consent management platform, so you guys would have seen like a cookie banner, and you can accept or decline or opt in, opt out, things like that. So this number 3, it's out of order. I'm sorry. It's a DSAR. That's the responding to DSARs. 4 is the 4 principle I think is super important as well, which is data ethics and privacy is everyone's responsibility. So we actually, like all the staff in the company, undergo regular privacy and security training so that we're able to embed privacy by design into our everyday data engineering practices. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. From government, we have a thing called the algorithm impact assessment, and we developed it for government, but it's online, anyone can use it, and it really just steps you through the things that you need to think about when you're doing anything with an algorithm. It came out of the algorithm charter, which most government agencies signed up to in about 2018, saying these are the things that we need to care about when we're doing algorithms, particularly when there's going to be decisions made as a result of those algorithms. And a lot of people were like, yeah, that's great, but it's all highfalutin principles. What do they actually mean? And so anyone who wants to use it, it's like a privacy impact assessment. It just takes you through really basically the questions that you need to ask. It's got use cases on what does it mean, what does it look like, and nice flow charts and things like that. So yeah, it's a resource. It's out there.
Excellent. All right, so I'm gonna weave in some audience questions here in a moment. So get ready if you do have questions. But to feed my own ego, I'm gonna ask one more question for this moment. So you mentioned data minimization. So why is something like that? Maybe you can explain a little bit about what data minimization means, but also why is that important from an ethics standpoint?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So data minimization basically just means you only collect what you need, and that's important because the less you have, the less problems you have to deal with, right?
More data, more problems, you're saying?
Yeah, or it's that you don't have enough data to do what you want to do. Hold on, I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry, I that was my fault. You were explaining data minimization and what that means from an ethics standpoint.
Yeah, so can I pass this to Lauren first?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple of things on that. So yeah, only collecting what you actually need. One of our data ethics principles is reciprocity. And so for us, what that actually means is if we're getting information about an individual, we hold ourselves to the bar of actually being able to give value back to that specific person too, which is in some ways a higher bar. It's not, we're going to take your data here and give it to your boss here, and maybe their life is better, but what did that do for you? So that's one of the ways, that's actually a further limit we place on it. One thing I will just say, which is a real trade-off we've decided to make, is it does mean, for example, let's say we've rolled out a new integration, we'll ask for the smallest set of scopes that we need, and we know we're going to do something with, and then sometimes we go along further. We're a startup, we're learning lots of things, and we realize actually we can do some really good stuff if we also get permissions for this other data source. And so it means we've accepted that we're going to be asking our customers for things more often. But we hope that then the trade-off is they have that confidence that if we're asking for something, it's because we have a really good reason and we're going to give you some good value from it. So I just want to, there's some real world trade-offs that we are making here, but we think it's worth it.
Great. Does anybody in the audience have a question? I think, we got one over here, Simon. As far away from you as possible. He's coming. He's still coming.
I'm curious what your opinions are on LLMs that are in the market right now that were controversially trained on data that they may not have had the rights to, and we all now use for various purposes, and what that means ethically for us. Both now and
a copyright question.
More than copyright, because there's PII and lots of stuff in there and how they're used as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I've been having a lot of conversations about that recently, and we've been talking an awful lot about how the LLMs is going to become like the fashion industry, right? And you need to think about the supply chain. and going all the way back to how was the cotton produced at the beginning to get your $5 t-shirt that you bought on the high street. I think that the excitement of it has run away, but we need to start having some of those ethical questions on where are we getting the data? How much were we paying people who were doing the training of the data? What does it actually look like through the supply chain? And I think that that will become a huge market opportunity for people who can do proper ethical AI in that. And I think that these new versions, the versions that we began with, will actually be seen in a very bad light in even probably 12 months' time. One can hope.
Yeah. I'll add to that. I mean, I'll broaden that beyond LLMs. They're like we're consumers of cloud services, and I was going to mention this earlier, but if we continue that facial recognition example, some of you might have heard of something called Project Nimbus, where some AI facial recognition is probably being used by a military against some dark-skinned people, and how do we feel about that? And and that technology is provided by Google and AWS, and so even going beyond the LLMs. What I think is the opportunity for all of us in this room is, as consumers of those services, if we come together, they're not going to listen to me, we're too small, but maybe if a bunch of us come together and say, actually, here's the lines that we care about, and if you give us better options, when someone gives us better options, this is what we're going to sign up to, because we don't want to be part of some of these causes of harm, then I think there's a lot of potential in that. So yeah, if anyone wants to start mobilizing around that with us, let me know.
All right. We got another question in the back corner. Amar.
Yeah, actually, it's not a question. It's more like I'm in the field of building LLMs, so it's a point of view on the question that was asked. But first, very briefly, Nimbus is a lot more worse than what you described. Nimbus actually controls weapons in real time in the field of combat.
I hand waved a bit.
And it can launch rockets and kill people that might be innocent. So it's a very, very scary technology. But on the topic of LLMs, LLMs are not storing or copying the information. They're learning from the information. And that's why this will go probably in many countries, like in the US, this is going all the way to the Supreme Court. Because when you go to school and study how Picasso draws, or study how, from the chemistry book of one of the famous chemists out there, it's completely your right to remember every single piece of information in that thing that you studied from as part of your studies. It's not your right to replicate them and sell them and take the money away from the previous author, but it is your right to learn from them. So it's a big topic of debate right now to set the boundaries on how can that information be re-leveraged. There's two views. The one view says, yes, you should copyright everything. That's hindering innovation in the US right now. There's other countries like Japan that are training on everything. They're not limiting themselves, and hence they're creating LLMs that are more advanced because of that. So I just want to make sure we're balanced in our views on it. There is two sides to that coin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of complexity too around some of the things that we see in the code co-pilots that are training off of code that's under different open source licenses, and they learn from that, and what's that mean in terms of the licenses. So very, very complicated. Like I said, no controversy or issues. Everyone agrees on this stuff. So in terms of, let's do one more audience question, and then we'll go back, because I'm feeling my ego is going down.
So for me, it's like first also a comment and then also a little bit like a question. I think one thing is like the LLMs really give us a mirror how we are. Because we are also like doing racial profiling. We have a problem with police, whatever. So humans are also doing this one. And the system just mirrors what we are doing. I think the advantage is we are just much more strict. And I just give you like a question. You can think about yourself, or you can even answer it. If you, for example, take a doctor and you say like he can measure something, he can say like, okay, if he gets like 2 out of 2,000 kids and he do a wrong decision, they will die. How good need to be an AI model that you accept that it has the same? And it's definitely not the same numbers that you expect from a human, because from a human, we always say, yeah, human makes mistakes. And I think this is a very difficult answer that we need to all find out. And there is no easy answer, but maybe you have like your opinion about it. But I think this is something that is, for me, also like going into that direction.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the challenges with the autonomous vehicles as well, is, there's human error that happens all the time in driving, but what's that mean when suddenly it's an autonomous vehicle? But one of you have something to add?
I mean, on that error rate, I will just say, for all that humans are flawed, we know that humans are inherently social creatures, and there's some good work that's been done to debunk things that have said otherwise. And so, like Humankind, for example, as a book, and so. I feel much more comfortable with a human making a morally complicated decision, even knowing how flawed humans are, than I do with a piece of technology which just doesn't have that capacity to care and doesn't have to worry about the social relationships and impacts of that decision on their life afterwards. And so I would say for things where it's these very heavy, irreversible life or death decisions, we have all sorts of things where we can use technology to supplement people, right? It can be human in the loop. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And that for me is the best answer in those really morally complicated places.
I come back to the trust triangle. When you're talking about trying to get social trust, one of the critical things is intimacy and actually knowing and having confidence and feeling like you know the person, or in this case, the technology. And we come at the fact we don't understand the technology at the moment. It's still very new and we don't trust it as a society. So you're always going to have that whole, it cannot hallucinate because I don't trust it. In another 10, 20 years, it will be like, oh, yeah, well, it is what it is, because we'll be much more comfortable with it. But in the early days that we're in of the LLMs particularly, you have such a high bar to get over to ensure that you can keep the trust going. It needs to have the credibility, it needs to have the intimacy, and it needs to have it will do what it says it's going to do on the box. And they're the things that people are going to judge it on. And so it's a time thing. And I think maybe in a few years' time, actually I'll feel more comfortable about it making life and death decisions, because it will be more logical than some of the people that I've met on this earth.
I think my answer to that is don't let perfect get in the way of good. That's why governance becomes very important. It's kind of like when you're designing like a data pipeline, right? You look at the edge cases, you compare the trade-offs. Though humans, we are flawed in our thinking, but it doesn't mean human in the loop is very important. So it's about finding these edge cases and explaining, designing the system, kind of considering your accountability options and your explainability, and then once that AI system has been designed, once you've made a decision, you explain those edge cases to your end users so that they understand and they sign the agreement, but they're fully on board with whatever decision you guys are with. Yeah.
I just on the first part too of what you said about LLMs amplifying sometimes the worst of humanity. I am very true, and also we know that we can design better, and by saying, hey, these are things that we care about. We care about creating tools that are not going to be racist or homophobic or sexist or transphobic or et cetera, et cetera. We have all the tools at our disposal to then teach what we build to be better than that, and so it's. I guess I don't think this is what you were saying, but sometimes people do say in sort of a fatalistic way, and I just want to say it's not at all fatalistic. It like all of our good design principles that we build for use when we're building apps to make them easily used by any person, we can apply that here to make sure that our data technologies are going to work for all kinds of people too.
So one question I wanted to get in before we kind of are out of time here is, if you look at other sort of professions, like legal, medicine, there are ethics as part of the training. And you have things like the Hippocratic Oath, and there's even ethics boards that if there's some sort of violation, you have to go in front of and sort of justify what you did. But when it comes to computer science and engineering, there's not really anything like that. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, should ethics be part of more baked into essentially our education programs, and should there be an ethics board essentially that can hold people accountable to decisions that they make?
5 years ago, when I started conversations like this, I would have said absolutely, and we should be baking that in. Now I'm not 100% sure. It was like what you said before around actually anyone can code now. You don't need to be I could code, for God's sake. No, we won't ever let that happen. But what worries me with the technologies now is that anyone can do it and they don't have the ethics training. And so ethics isn't about a industry or a particular profession anymore. We need to bake that into the critical thinking that we're doing, because everybody is going to need to understand it, because everyone is going to be is going to be coding and is going to be developing things. And so, yeah, I've kind of moved on, but I think that it's still a conversation we should probably have, because I'm still meeting some data scientists, so you have to explain what ethics are. No one in this room obvs.
I think it absolutely should be, part of maybe not part of the education system right now, but definitely every business should care about it. And the reason is because failure to comply, I know not in New Zealand, there aren't any direct consequences, but failure to comply for countries outside of New Zealand can incur financial loss. So failure to comply, for example, in European countries under the GDPR, you can incur like a fine of £20 million or 4% of your total revenue, whichever of the two is greater. And I know that there are talks right now in New Zealand as well to make things stricter. So I think, it should just be a must.
All right, and then quickly, Lauren,
yes,
do you have
super fast.
anything?
Yes, anything that is potentially causing harm to people, it's the technologies we build in some cases are having life or death impact. And then also, I just want to go back. So I happen to go to a university that is in the liberal arts model. And so the foundational premise there is that everyone should know a bit of the math and the sciences and should know a bit of the philosophy and the psychology. And that is a hundreds and hundreds of years old model. And I think there's a reason for that, because we as humans, sure, we want to be able to think logically and rationally, and we are still social, emotional creatures operating in a world that is the same. And so, frankly, we will all be better off if we navigate both, but also the things that we build will just work better in the messy realities of the human world if we acknowledge that it's not all as neat and nicely laid out as some of our databases.
All right, fantastic. Well, I see a man with a very shiny green jacket over there, which means I think we are at time. So I want to thank so much our panelists, Lauren, Jessica, and Emma. Let's give them a round of applause, and we will vacate the stage.